doing, man?
I am exhausted.
Yeah? Yeah. The boys wear you out?
No, not from this. I just have been deadline crunching. I'm finishing my last issue of Secret Avengers, and once that's done, I'm down to 2 books.
Yeah.
But the last 6 months, it's pretty gnarly.
Are you looking forward to being down to 2 books?
Dude.
You ready? Yep. All right. Hey guys, you guys are on the Geek Exchange. Let's hope if you're watching this. We're here with Rick Remender, my favorite writer, and you're at the Comic Bug in Manhattan Beach. We're going to do a quick little career overview. We're calling this segment From Captain Dingleberry to Captain America. So, little known fact about Mr. Remender here, his first title, Captain Dingleberry.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you miss him?
I do, because I miss absurdity. I mean, I think we need more absurdity in comics in general, you know, and there was something really, at the time I was making that, I was working with a couple of buddies at Fox Animation making a film called Anastasia. And it was, you know, it's a family-friendly, you know, and you're just drawing bullshit.
Crap.
You're drawing bullshit every day. And so at lunch we'd sit around and like listen to Frank Zappa and talk about, you know, Tank Girl and what we wish we were doing. And we just made our mind up to say, you know, well, fuck it, let's do that. Let's make something absurd. And that was the idea behind Captain Dingleberry. It was a Superman who had a dimensional vortex in his rectum that then took you to Third World, where he sent his prisoners. And then there's this Frank Zappa song where he talks about Sir Richard Pumpaloaf. And so that was our first villain, was a guy who had a penchant for French loaf, and he had a ray that turned people into bread, and he would then sodomize them. And that was the comic that we decided to make.
And how does that inform your Captain America run?
Yeah. Jesus, it's kind of the same thing, because Cap gets whisked away to another dimension the same way. Am I just duplicating it without all of the scatological humor?
Dude, if you got a formula like that, why change it?
Yeah, it's true. I guess now that you point it out, I'm a hack. Damn.
Speaking of hack, so a lot of people, Franken-Castle, I think it's great.
Sure.
I mean, I see a guy here who's like given a mission to write a Punisher comic, and how do you make that interesting for yourself and maybe for 6 or 7 people, right? And you turn it into a horror comic. You want to talk about, did you piss a lot of people off with that, or?
It's you know, the people I did piss off are vocal. It's weird because everybody who likes it, they always say like, well, I was one of the only who loved it. I'm like, no, most people loved it. But the hardcore Punisher fans, they take that shit pretty seriously. Yeah, I mean, you know, I like the Punisher, okay. You know, it's like the Death Wish thing. I mean, I get it. Power fantasy, like, you know, the criminal did wrong by me, and we're going to strangle him in his own blood, and, you know. All right. But
it's fun a couple times.
Yeah, it is, you know, but Garth Ennis had just done, like, a decade of every, like, the Russian Mafia, Afghanistan, you know. I mean, I was reading it, and I was like, well, there's nothing left here.
Right.
You know, like, so I'm going to resurrect his family and then kill him and then turn him into Frankenstein.
And it's like his name was made to be, you know, done that to. Franken-Castle.
Sure, this is begging for it. That was actually Tony. Actually, after I'd come up with it, Tony's like, you mean, so we're just doing Franken-Castle? And I was writing it down. I'm like, yes, we are. That's the title is done. Thank you, sir.
Nice.
But, so yeah, I mean, it was an attempt. Like, look, I mean, at that point, Tony and I had you know, he had done serious horror and launching The Walking Dead, and I had done plenty of that stuff in my creator own stuff to that point. And we wanted to take that and mix it with Frank-Castle in a way where it was still an engaging story, where you cared about the monsters he was protecting, and we got to, you know, create the Legion of Monsters for the new millennium. And, you know, so yeah, it was nice that, you know, it's the great thing is I looked on it on Amazon once, and it has like 5 5-star reviews and 5 1-star reviews, and that's like perfect, right? Because like that's what you want. If you get the 3-star reviews on anything, you're like, ah, fuck, I botched it. But a 1-star review or a 5-star review is always like, thank you, there.
Love it or hate it.
Success, yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
One of my favorite comics, and anybody that shops at the comic, I would say every customer, everybody in this room, has been recommended Fear Agent.
Thank you.
I think it's probably the greatest comic in the last decade, if not last 2 decades. Don't let it get to your head, but it is fantastic.
No, well, you're wrong.
Talk about Fear Agent. I mean, I don't really have any questions. Just why are your comics so much better than everybody else's?
Well, my comics are tremendous because I have a wealth of. The origin of Fear Agent was I had drawn a book for Bruce Campbell called Man with the Screaming Brain. This was actually a year after we started Fear Agent. But prior to that, I was working with Hilary Barta on trying to put together a few books that really dug up the old EC stuff, like Frank Frazetta, Al Williamson, and to try and bring that to modern comics, because we weren't seeing any of that stuff represented. You know, I wanted New Zenitsu Tales. I wanted, you know, not that was EC, but that was also in the same vein and inspired by. So I think Tony and he was on Walking Dead 4 or 5, I don't remember. But we were talking one night about it, and I had been doing these Wallywood spaceman sketches, and he had just done something for Rob Zombie that had a spaceman. He'd done it for Rob Zombie spook comic or something. It had an old rickety rocket that had crashed on the moon, and there's a bunch of tentacles.
Spook show spectacular.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of tentacles fighting a masked Mexican wrestler or something. And I was like, you know, why aren't we doing a science fiction? And we talked about it, and it was because most comic fans don't want science fiction.
Right.
And you know, the more we talked about it, it was also that 3 years prior to that, most comic fans didn't want horror. Before 30 Days of Night and The Walking Dead took off, you know, they didn't want that either. And I tried a horror book, Dawn Creature, years prior to that, and you know, I was on, no, horror will never work. You guys are wasting your time with this stuff. And you know, we decided that that's kind of maybe the reason to do it. So, long story short, we dug out old EC comics, we talked about what we wanted to do, we put together the project, and yeah, we just kept it going. So once we got it off the ground and up and running, I went out and approached Jerome Pena to come on and tag team with Tony on arcs, and from then we just sort of dug in and got it going.
Yeah, I discovered a lot of great artists through that series too, and you seem to be a guy that gets in the trenches, as it were. Like, I remember when you were doing Last Days of American Crime.
Sure.
You brought Greg Tuccini in, which I think that's like some of his first, at least American work that's been published.
He'd been hopping around a lot. He was a guy who'd done some Green Lantern comics and the Thor book, you know, like a mini series. But he'd never. It was always jumping around where he could never really make his mark.
So I mean, you're almost a crusader for artists in that.
I'm an artist, and
Okay.
I know a lot of artists. Tony and I are friends because we had drawn on some books and you know, done some things in the same anthologies. And so, and it was also for me as a writer, a lot of the time it was having an idea and talking to like Kieran Dwyer or Tony Moore or Jerome Pena or any of the guys, you know, or Greg Tuccini, and as an artist and a storyboard guy, and them saying that's a really great idea, I'll draw that, and us putting it together, and they would have faith in me to do it. And then over time, the writing really took off, you know, and I walked away from art.
Yeah, you were like strictly an inker for like I just did a career overview thing.
I inked one book. I inked the Avengers, and now I was.
But it was like for 2 years or something, or.
Yeah, it was.
Well, no, you also did. Did you do Last Christmas?
I penciled that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
But I get offended because I'm going back to 10 years time when the problem with inking the Avengers when you're also a writer or a penciler and you haven't established yourself is that you put your name as an inker on a book that goes out to everybody.
And then everybody remembers.
And I
that.
literally remember going to New York right after I was done with the Avengers run, and I had a pitch for Dan Brereton, and I wanted to do a book. And I remember an editor. I was starting to pitch him a story, and I was sitting with Kieran Dwyer, who had drawn the Avengers, and the editor said, "Is this your inker pitching me a story?" And I was like, "I've blown it. I've made a terrible, terrible mistake." But yeah, in the trenches around that time, working with all of those guys, and we all became friends. And a lot of my work came from, I was teaching at the Academy in San Francisco. I was storyboarding at Electronic Arts. I was in-house doing those kind of jobs. But those guys, you know, drew the crazy, stupid shit that I came up with, and people bought it. And so I just kept kind of honing the writing end of things.
Yeah, I mean, if you look here, I mean, this is your career, okay? It fits. But eventually it's going to be longer. And I kind of, you know, okay, we got these years, right? Then, boom, 2005, it just hits, you know, Fear Agent, Sea of Red, Strange Girl, Nightmare. That was when
that was a big year.
The Remender Revolution started, I think. You know, if you look at that. And then, you know, bringing it on up to like 2009, 2008, Punisher. And now you kind of are holding the keys to the castle over at Marvel, I think. I don't know if they want to admit this or not. They've let a madman into the.
It is ridiculous.
You know, I mean, look at this.
It is ridiculous when they said, you know, when Cap was available. I was like, you guys have any idea what you're doing? What I'm going to do with Captain America? Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. I do have moments of like, When I'll hear people, it's always when somebody else points it out. Like they'll say, "Well, you're writing the flagship of the Marvel Now thing," and I'm like, "Yeah, I guess I am. That's weird.
It's wild, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to kind of set a lot of wow." Or in Captain America, but on some level, when you're making it, you're still in your house just making a comic book. It's not really Captain America when I'm writing it. It's just my version.
It's Captain Dingleberry.
Or if anything, it's just fan fiction.
Yeah.
It's just me going like, oh, what would I do with Captain America? Well, what was he like growing up? And and you just write the things. But it's been gratifying. I mean, it's nice because, like you said, in 2005, I think a lot of the books that we launched that year and what I was building on, I remember in 2003 and 4, I made my mind up to give it one last go. And comic books were not financially rewarding up until that point. And like I said, I'd inked the Avengers. So pitching myself as a penciler or a writer to anybody was very difficult. They would say, well, you're an inker. Right. And I was like, God damn it, So I was like...
You're like Tito Jackson at this point.
A little bit, and I don't want to marginalize inking, but I mean, it wasn't sick, it was one thing I could do. So long and the short of it is, I was working at Electronic Arts that year, and I was making good money, and they offered me a permanent position to stay and storyboard on the Simpsons video games. And I had to choose between really pushing that, the writing stuff and making a go of it in comics, which had really started to kind of bubble up, or to do the safe, 401k
pension,
job. And ultimately, I chose to give it a go and put those books out and to make them all happen. And they all found publishers and homes and sold pretty well. So.
And they're all pretty damn good. I think so. But so any sort of scoop for what lies ahead? Right now they stole Hitler's brain with Professor X, right?
That's right.
And Captain America is this spiritual brother to Fear Agent, right? You're kind of getting your sci-fi rocks.
I'm not hiding it. I mean, but it wasn't on the outset the intention. It was like those Kirby books you put up. It really was doing my homework and reading that stuff and going like, man, first of all, Zola is like a great character. He's a twisted, fucked up Nazi who sees all life as clay to be manipulated, and he's a sociopath, so he has no care for anybody's feelings or emotions. And he's also a wacky science fiction villain, So you get to do that thing where you take this guy who looks like a Saturday morning cartoon, but then when you see the terrible, terrible things I have him doing in the first 7 issues, and what a complete just scumbag nightmare he is, that's always the juxtaposition I like. Yeah. Like Red Skull's the same way. Red Skull's an action figure, it's a Saturday morning villain like, I'll get you, Captain America.
Right.
But you want to do things with him that you're like, what did he just do? So the tone of it is sort of over-the-top science fiction, but at the same time I think that the reason Fear Agent works is that the part of it is a character, and it's a character, if you haven't read it, that I invested in personally and put a lot of myself into writing him, but it's also something where any of these things, the genre is almost just the window dressing, and the character is what's going to sell it or not. It's the emotional connection, and most people who read comics are dudes between 15 and 40 years of age, and we don't like to admit that we want soap opera, but we sure do love the shit out of our X-Men from Claremont, and that was soap opera, and beyond just the soap opera aspect is the drama and the character. So with Cap, the challenge that I wanted to give myself was to put him in a situation that was something that I was familiar with. It was fun. That's fine.
That happens when I get excited.
Yeah, your phone goes off. But then, long and the short of it was to have something where we also were doing what we'll be doing in the first 10 issues, which is exploring Captain America's early years and seeing what it was like for this kid to grow up in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, especially during the Great Depression. Which is an era that we know happened to him, but we didn't really see it. How did this 98-pound weakling come to be? That this kid won't not go fight Nazis? Like if I was a 98-pound weakling, I'll be honest, I'm not sure if I'm going to push that hard. So when I got to that point in his origin and trying to sort of unearth what it was I liked about him, I realized I don't know. I know he's the 98-pound weakling who won't give up, and he's full of tenacity and patriotism, and he's this shining example of humanity, but I don't know how he became that person. And so for me, the Dimension Z storyline is something where I wanted to juxtapose that origin and that story about who Steve Rogers really is against Steve in a situation where he was dealing with a child who was around the same age he was in some of the stories, and sort of juxtapose him being in a father role and versus where he was in his own youth. And I think that it comes down to the heart. And if that works, then you guys will dig it. And if it doesn't, whether I put him in a Western setting, sci-fi, or fighting Nazis, in a, it wouldn't work.
Well, first issue was cool, and it's interesting, yeah, because you have that sort of 1920s, very reality-based thing happening, and then, of course, I don't think have you ever told yourself, oh, that's a terrible idea, and not done it? Like, for the Franken-Castle, there's things that you would
but
not do?
The Franken-Castle, but if it felt terrible, like that, it's one thing to have an idea and go Franken-Castle, and if it's just Franken-Castle lumbering around New York shooting people, then no.
Right.
It's about when the insanity level of the idea means nothing to me. It's the story that it tells me.
Okay.
And so when we came up with Franken-Castle, the story was already putting itself together. I mean, it was immediately like, oh, well, what is Frank protecting? Innocence. All right, well, we've seen him protecting the people of New York, ostensibly. I mean, obviously he's just a revenge-fueled animal killing people. But what if you gave him real creatures that needed his help? Like another subset that was like, the mutants were in the 80s, maybe.
Right.
And then it starts to get interesting for me. And then I start to think about the external representation of a monster. Frank-Castle's a monster. Let's make him a monster. And then I start getting into the different parts of the metaphor that I go, oh, I can tell. What can I tell you about this character using this set piece? So the idea is normally like a Shazam where you get the light bulb, but you don't know you're going to do it until you really start seeing if there's a story in it, which is the strength of something like 30 Days of Night. I tell you the pitch for that. You see a vampire story in your head start to play. And that's the difference between a good and a bad idea, I think, is that initial kick of high concept and whether or not you can take it someplace good.
Cool. Well, those are all my questions. I'm excited to see where everything's leading and where, see what you're going to do next and what you're doing now. And thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to thank Lewis for helping us all come together. Dude, I was going to dig these up, but I usually email you like every 8 months to ask you to come and sign, probably for the last 5 years. And the last time I asked you, you said, I'm really busy, 2012 is out of the question, maybe next year. And I'd had a few glasses of wine. I'm like, dude, we all know the world's ending in 2012. You're never signing it to Comic Bug. You remember that email?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Vaguely. No. It's not. It's just the schedule this year has been gnarly.
Well, dude, I
appreciate the support. And anybody who's ever interested in even me coming to their shop, I'm always flattered. So it's not a matter of me dismissing it offhandedly. Sitting in my golden right.
I believed you were busy. I totally, no. or just poor time manager or something. But
right. Yeah.
But thank you so much for coming, and thank all you guys for coming out tonight and sharing in comic book greatness incarnate. Rick Remender. Very much. Anybody have any questions out there? Dom always has a question.
So you've worked with like Tony Moore now, Pena, and people who they're really good artists, but working now with JR on Captain, is it a little daunting when they first? Did they put you together? Or did you get to ask for an artist?
No, they put that one together, and I'm a big fan of. I mean, John Romita Jr. was doing the Uncanny X-Men when I started reading it, and I'm a big fan of John's work and his adherence to just craft, and like I still look at what he and Al Williamson were doing on the Daredevil Man Without Fear. For inspiration all the time. I think it's an incredibly underrated series, and so for me it was definitely daunting. I worked with them before when I killed the Punisher, when I turned him into FrankenCastle. They brought in John and Klaus and Dean White to do that, and it was it was a real treat. I thought it was a one-off. Like, hey, I got to work with John Romita Jr. and Klaus Janson. Take that. Imaginary guy I'm fighting. But it was, yeah, of course it's daunting. Of course there's an aspect of it where, but I think the real thing is that with any new artist you work with, there's finding the level. Like, for guys like that I've come up with, like Tony and Jerome and Kieran, so many guys I've worked with, and Greg Tocchini, we've worked together for years and done so many different projects, and we're personal friends, and we know each other. So I can call out an obscure piece of graffiti from an issue of Thrasher magazine from 1988, and we've already talked about it over a beer years ago. Things like that, like naturally mesh. And so there's a level of purity of intention that comes through, I think, when two people are friends. And so working with a new artist, be it somebody like John Romita Jr. or somebody who's, or John Cassaday, obviously, or somebody who's not of that caliber, it's always varying degrees of integration, and it's always something that you have to adjust for. But that's part of the fun. Like, how John visually interprets a script might not be how I saw it in my head on that page, but it's a John Romita Jr. page, and it's great, and you adjust accordingly. And everybody's interpretation of everything is different. It's just a matter of of how those collaborations gel. And now that we're 3 issues in, John's on the book for at least 10 issues, which any more is unheard of. And we all bitch and moan about there's no consistency. And so I'm hoping that I've got an opportunity to do 10 issues of Captain America with John Romita Jr., Klaus Janson, and Dean White. Hopefully it'll bear fruit.
Known for busting out pages too.
He keeps the things on track. But the issue 3, and issue 1 and 2 are gorgeous. Issue 3, I didn't let him off any hooks. I was like writing it's like the origin of Zola. There were some really hairy things in there, and he came through, and it was like the level of detail and love he's putting into it is increasing on every issue. It's just so gorgeous. And I think that, again, with Johnny or anything, if you let the fact that it's your childhood, idol or somebody you respect that much, if you let that into your head, you'll change what you write and you'll be safe. Safe, for me, is Cap and Falcon running through New York, about to go take down, Bartok or Crossbones or whatever. And that would have been a safe choice. John would have knocked it out of the park. Safe is not taking him into a dimension that Zola has grown an army and a city inside of and going crazy in sort of a heavy metal setting. So as long as I like the idea and I'm not being safe and I'm not letting the size of the artist change the intention of the script, I think that it'll usually work out. You guys would be better judges than me, though.
How about a Mike Zeck fill-in issue, though?
When I got Punisher, I was calling Mike every day. I'm like, hey, Mike, you want to come back to comics? And he's like, why do I want to do that? And I was like, I don't know, but I want it.
Then he got really drunk and emailed.
Yeah, just pictures, and he's like, dear sir, stop. Please stop.
Okay, it was normal.
Yeah. No, I'm a huge fan of Zeck. I think that, I don't know why a guy like Zeck isn't hoisted up on all of our shoulders and paid $1 million to continue to do comics.
Was airbrush covered? Oh man, we could reminisce, but we won't make people watch that. Those are good.
2 dudes reminiscing about comics.
That's like every podcast, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah.
We're not going to be like that. Any other questions? Back here.
I have a question. So, in your last issue of Uncanny X-Force, there was this really intense scene at the end where Wolverine and the Sun fight to the death, and then you kind of have that moment at the bottom of each arc. They're like having this father-son moment that's like very emotional. Like, what was your process that led you to have something so violent yet something so beautiful? Like, it kind of like balance each other out.
Well, when I was putting that arc together way back in around issue 8 or 9, and I was thinking about what the kill was going to be for that issue, and I came up with, Wolverine has killed Jason Aaron was having him kill all these bastards that he didn't know about, and I was like, and that's great, that's cool, and that's a huge hit, but there's one that he does, and I was thinking about what's the emotional context there that makes me care. 2 dudes with claws, honestly, I am bored. I don't give a shit anymore. And they have healing factors, so it's just dudes cutting each other, I'm out. And then it was the same with Sabretooth. I wanted to do I wanted Sabretooth involved in the Brotherhood. I wanted that to feel important, but I didn't want just more and I'm cutting you, and now I'm cutting you! We're bloody and cut up! So it was a matter of trying to figure out, I knew what the Brotherhood's plot was, and I knew what Sabretooth... I knew I wanted him playing, this was all his revenge ploy, even though you thought it was Dakin's. And then when I was getting to the Dakin-Wolverine conflict, I wrote the first draft thinking Frank Miller comics, where they're just hacking each other up, and I cut it down. It was nonsense, But as for flashing back to, it was the conversation that I had in 33 where Dakin was telling him all the things that he wishes, so that it wasn't just a two-dimensional villain. It was a kid who grew up in hell, and Logan didn't know he existed. And he's telling him, I grew up in hell. I grew up with people beating me. I grew up with, like, they'd give me these nannies, and once I fell in love with them, not they were my mom, they'd try and kill me. This was my life. That's why I am who I am, getting back to the nurture and nature debate that the whole series kind of explored. And so once I wrote out what he wished, he's like, I wished for this, I wished for that, I would dream about having a dad who taught me to ride my bike and all these things. It just kind of hit me like, that's what Wolverine needs to be seeing in his head when he drowns his son to death in the next issue.
A blood tear? That was pretty crazy.
I don't know if it was a blood tear. I think it was just blood going in. I didn't write, and a blood tear.
We got one more question, and I think Rick's got a date tonight, so make it good.
Okay, all right, Rick. What do you think is more important, story or more developed characters or characters?
Plot? You mean plot or character?
Plot or character.
Here's the question. So in X-Force, I bypass in the first arc character until, like, you know, you get some, but it's like the team's together, they have a base, they're on a mission. And it was, boom, out of the gates. With Uncanny Avengers, it seemed to me that that team has no natural reason for being there. And coming out of AVX and the death of Xavier, I wanted to show you everybody's characters stuff. Havoc dealing with what his brother's done. Wolverine dealing with that they failed Charles. Rogue and Wanda and how they don't like each other. Cap trying to make up for the fact that he's let this go on and never been involved. So on that front, I've started the first 2 issues of Uncanny Avengers are all character. There's not much action. You get some action with Rogue, because some people were really upset that X-Force didn't give you a background and put it together, and whereas some people are upset that Uncanny Avengers is setting up character before a plot. So it really comes down to the kind of reader. And so for me, I could do both. Ultimately, it's all bullshit and nonsense without character. Like, plot is just the nonsense back down, and then this guy does this, and then it's really his mother, and then his mother's really a zombie, and then the zombie, and then we go into the whole world blows up. You know, like, it's plot. It's like putting up, you take your 3-act structure and you start plugging things in and you figure out a clever plot. It's the character stuff that makes me go, oh my God, I want that guy to make it. Please let that guy make it, or please let her find her dad, or whatever. And so at the heart of it, if you don't have character, the rest of it's just kind of like fan fiction, I think.
All right, and there we have it, folks. You're gonna sign a few more autographs, and then you're out of here, like Vladimir. Thanks again, dude. And we'll do this again. Now that we got his phone number, we'll get him back in 6 months or so. We'll get him on top of his deadlines. Cool.